You're listening to the Living Writers Show on WCBN FM Ann Arbor. Today's guest is Allie Carter, the author of I'd Tell You I Love You, But Then I'd Have to Kill You. How are you today, Allie?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being on the show. So we read in your book jacket that you live in a Midwestern town, and we were wondering where that town is and whether there was some secretive swanky boarding school for girls nearby.
No, I actually live in southeastern Kansas in a very small town down here. And no, I'm afraid there aren't any spy boarding schools around that I know about. But that's part of the glory of the spy boarding school is you never really know where they are.
And we were wondering what inspired you to write a book like this. I mean, there's a lot of media for kids that focuses around spies, but maybe not in such a detailed way, right next to you, Harry Potter style.
Well, thank you. I honestly have to say I got the idea for this book about a year ago because I was home watching Alias on TV, and I had the show on mute because if you're technically working, it's okay to have the TV on if it's on mute. And so I had the TV on mute, and I look up, and it's a flashback to when one of the girls was young, and she was living in an orphanage, and it just showed all these girls running around this big building in the middle of the night. And of course, the sound was off, and so I didn't know what was going on. And the first thing that popped into my head was, did she go to a school for spies? And then I turned it up and, come to find out that she just lived in an orphanage. But then that, of course, planted the seed of, oh, my gosh, what if there was such a thing as a school for spies and how great that would be. And so that's kind of how the story came to be.
For those unfamiliar with the novel, Allie's book is about a 15-year-old girl who is in spy boarding school training to do covert operations and governmental spy work.
And, of course, all of the hilarity that ensues. And, I mean, I guess going along with that, it sounds like you were inspired by sort of pop media. The book is pretty playful and believable when dealing with those subjects. I mean, as believable as spy boarding school can possibly be. But there are lots of issues such as covert surveillance that are very problematic to a lot of people in politics and in the media right now, in the news media. Did you think about that more serious side of what these girls are being prepared for, what they're doing while you were writing? And do you think your readers do, or that it's just sort of a fun romp?
Well, my first instinct was to make it just a fun book. And, the kind of the main crisis in the book is that this girl who goes to this very top secret school has fallen for a normal boy who could never know the truth about her. And so that got me to thinking about, back I was in high school and whatnot, about how kind of every girl with a crush is a spy. They just don't have the training to back it up. You're staking out his locker, you're finding out what he's saying about you behind your back. And, these girls, they can actually hack into his computer and tap his phones. And so that's what they do because they're spies, and this is what they've been trained for in a way. But, yeah, I'm glad to hear you mention, there is a lot of serious aspects of espionage in this day and age. And I didn't want it to get too over the top. I enjoyed the Spy Kids movies, and I've enjoyed some things like that. But, there's never really much level of realism in those. And one of the things I really wanted in this book was there to be, at least kind of that undercurrent of what if this was real. And the girls, they kind of get into these silly antics, and they have Gilmore Girls marathons, and they all worship Orlando Bloom and all the things that ordinary girls do. But I think a lot of the reason that they do that is because they know deep down how serious the work they're eventually going to have to do is going to be. And so that's kind of a coping mechanism, if you will. We're going to try to stay normal as long as possible. And when we talk about surveillance and all the things that they do, I think, they're being trained to do it because it's just a necessary aspect of the intelligence life. And, whenever I hear about the things that are going on today, about some of those things possibly being abused and whatnot, I try not to relate that too much to what the girls are doing, because I think there's a difference between knowing how to do some of those types of things and then doing them inappropriately. And granted, maybe spying on the 15-year-old boy that you have a crush on isn't the most appropriate use of those skills, but hey, if you're a 15-year-old girl with a crush, what else are you going to do?
So I guess I've been wondering for a while whether you prefer the movie Spy Kids or Agent Cody Banks in the, child spy genre.
Which of those two I prefer, or do I like them in general?
I guess which you preferred, or if you like them at all in general.
I liked them both. I thought they were both a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the first Spy Kids just because, I love Antonio Banderas, and I thought he was very cute and very good in it. Agent Cody Banks I thought was just another really kind of cute take on it. I don't necessarily know how much comparison those two movies would have with my book or the movie if it ever gets made of my book. Because mine's more focused on less bringing down the bad guy. And that's one thing that as I've started working on the sequel and talking with my editor, a lot of spy kids movies or spy books or in that genre in general, it's kind of about how do you bring down the bad guy of the week, kind of the villain of the week mantra. And, this book isn't really about that. It isn't, we have to save the world by, this, taking out this evil villain. It's more, how am I going to cope with my exceptional life? And it's really about a girl who has lived in one way, she's a very worldly girl in that she's seen a lot of the world and she knows, 14 different languages and how to kill a man with a piece of uncooked spaghetti. She knows all these things. But on the other hand, she's lived a very sheltered, secluded life. And when she meets this ordinary boy who thinks she's an ordinary girl, she realizes just how little about herself and about life she really knows. And that's really more of the gist of this book, I guess, if you will. It's less about bringing down the bad guy and more about, a girl trying to figure out exactly what she wants out of life.
I think a key difference is that in those films, like, it's the children being kind of like thrown into the adult role, whereas your book juxtaposes like the seriousness of the adult lives with, the potential for that life later on for the girls. And I think
exactly. The teachers want them to be prepared, but on the other hand, they want them to stay kind of as sheltered as long as possible.
Why did you choose to make it an all-girls school? I mean, obviously it forwards the plot, but just when you were thinking about putting the book together at the very first, was that something that came right at the beginning or along with the rest of the story?
Probably my first instinct was to have it be co-ed. And then in talking with my agent, we decided that making it a girls' school would actually, give us more potential for stories down the road. Mm-hmm. Also, a big thing is I got to thinking, once I started thinking about the founder of the school, Jillian Gallagher, who founded the school shortly after the Civil War. And when you think about life in the late 1800s, if you were a woman in the 1800s and you wanted to get an education, you were probably going to have to be of a social class where you could afford some kind of private school, which, of course, the Gallagher Academy is a private school. But you weren't going to learn math and science and languages. You were going to learn, leg crossing and husband getting. And I thought that it would just kind of be fitting for this exceptional woman to found a school where girls could get the kind of education they couldn't get anywhere else. And I think that's probably very key to the history of the school and the backstory of the school is that it was founded for women and for girls. Also, when you think about it, women have played a vital role in espionage throughout the years. In the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C., there's a wonderful kind of tribute to women in espionage because, let's face it, there are not a lot of men out there really truly attribute women as being a real threat. And so they're able to gain access to places and to do things that men probably wouldn't have the opportunity to do. And so I love that aspect of the Gallagher Girls, is that, being a girl is actually part of their main secret weapon.
Do you think that the actions in the school reflect just the way girls are or would be if they really just live their lives with no boys around, or something more having to do with the seriousness of what they're being prepared for? Because there's a lot of that brought up in the book.
I think I've never gone to an all-girls school, so that was something that I really kind of struggled with a little bit. And then I just tried to ask myself, what would girls be like in this environment? And especially considering the fact that these aren't ordinary girls. They're all of genius IQs. Most of them have parents who are spies. And so they're a little different kind of girl in general, but at their soul, they're trying just to be normal. They love the WB, and they listen to radios, and they are just all about makeup and all that kind of stuff to the extent that you can be without boys around it to be pressured for. And I think it's almost a little bit of a utopian environment for girls. in that respect, because there's not a lot of cattiness that goes on at the Gallagher Academy. And I really like that about the school, and I like that about those girls. And